Well, welcome to the second webinar that S4R is organizing. My name is Susie Ann. I'm from the World Duchenne Organization. And for the people that don't know it, we're a collective of Duchenne patient organizations, and we're helping to improve the treatment and the quality of life of Duchenne patients and families. And one of the ways we're doing it is by participating in this S4R project. And we're very, very happy to be working together with Melanoma Patient Network Europe today. And I will hand my stick over to Bettina, and she will tell you everything about how to follow scientific news for patient advocates. But first, I have some. So this will be the speakers of today. I was already talking about Bettina, and well, I'm Susie Ann Bakker. I'm the communications coordinator of the World Duchenne Organization. And just to be sure that you're following along for the webinar, if you have any questions that you want to ask during the webinar, because you're all probably on mute, you can ask them in the chat panel. So if you go to the right or to the bottom, you can see the more, and on more you can see the chat window. So ask your questions there, and then after the webinar has ended, I can curate a few questions and we can ask them. Second part is please make sure that you're on mute, just for the sake of everybody to follow along, which makes it a lot more pleasant for everybody. And if you have any questions, you can always tweet them with the hashtag S4R webinar, or if you have any questions afterwards, you can always ask them on info@share4air.org. And if you can see the bottom corner, we also have some tips. And just around the webinar, we have some tips popping up, so make sure to keep an eye on those too. Okay, Bettina, I will just hand over the slides to you. It's up to you.
Okay, perfect. Can everyone hear me? Say just like Suzanne?
Yep.
Okay, super, good. So, thank you very much for the kind introduction, and it's my great pleasure to share with you tonight something I'm actually very passionate about, and that is science. And to give you a little bit of understanding why I care so much about it is that, well, I am a scientist by background. I have studied medicine and then moved on to do a PhD in molecular biology. So I have spent a few years in science, and I've appreciated scientific thinking. And when I then moved into patient advocacy after my husband died of melanoma in 2012, I've taken some of that thinking with me. And I would like, in the next 45 minutes or so, I would like to go through why patient advocates should actually care about scientific news in the first place, and then give you a short introduction how one can actually start to read scientific literature, which can be daunting at first. Then, and this is quite timely because there are a few scientific conferences coming up, like how do we make sure that when we attend scientific congresses, we actually get the most out of them? And then some tips and tricks how one can stay up to date without having to search oneself every day. And then we're going to summarize, and hopefully, we will be done by 8 o'clock because then I have to pick up my daughter. If I could have the next slide, please. So, why should we care about scientific news? Now, medical progress depends on progress in science. And if you're able to read like science or scientific articles in their original form, you're definitely faster and you have access to more reliable information than any updates you can find online in the daily news or other sources of information that are written for like a lay audience, for example. If you attend medical congresses in person, this is where the latest scientific news is shared. So you will be just in the right place, namely where also your oncologists or physicians get their updates. And it doesn't get faster than that, really. Understanding the process is important because in the end, you can only influence what you understand. And it is very important to keep in mind that science, or the way science is conducted, is not something that fell from the sky or is a law of nature. It is a man-made construct. This is something that the scientific community agreed to. These are standards, but these standards are not unchangeable. And some of these standards have had negative effects for patients, namely for particular clinical trial design questions. And if we want to change that, we first have to understand what they look like, then understand what the issues are, and then think about alternatives. And last but not least, many of us are running patient forums or are in contact with patients. And if we want to ensure that we are not inadvertently spread inaccurate information, we have to first understand what is accurate and what is inaccurate. So it is critical to be able to judge scientific information in order to keep patients in our vicinity or in our surroundings safe. Now, next slide, please. So scientific thinking for me is the basis of evidence-based advocacy, and I would like to share a few thoughts about what I understand under evidence-based advocacy. Most of us end up in patient advocacy because of a personal concern. As I previously said, I ended up in patient advocacy because my husband died of melanoma. So most of us have a similar story, and there's something that affected us so much that we were just not willing to simply take it and leave it there, but we decided to act. So we all have a very strong personal motivation. We also have a story that is usually moving others, and most of us started that way. If we leave it at that story, however, we are just a single voice, and we just have one very specific perspective on things. And that perspective does not, while it matters, and it definitely matters for us, does not have to be representative of an entire group of patients. If we want to change our surroundings and the system, however, it has to be for the benefit of all patients of our conditions, not just ourselves. And for that, we need evidence in order to support our case. Evidence also helps us to make arguments for or against certain decisions. So being able to support our claims with evidence is a big step forward in making advocacy more powerful and more successful ultimately. Next slide, please. Now, how we started our own network, the Melanoma Patient Network Europe, was with a workshop, because there were many of us who said, like, well, they find it really hard to read original scientific literature, and I was thinking what I could do about it. And what we did is we organized a weekend workshop where we took one study in melanoma apart, and we had an oncologist who was so kind to join us and who just went through the paper with us, and we had discussions how to best do it. It had definitely changed the attitude in our own network and made it easier for people to access papers, to read about it, and to read them and to discuss about them. So we have a bit of history in this. So we're 2018 now. This was 2015, and we have been teaching other networks and have given workshops on this topic since. So and this is now kind of building on what we started in 2015. Now, so for me, 3 points are important. Sorry, there is still someone who is not muted. Could you please mute yourself? We have Angels, Menorca, Neves, and Professor Karen Woolley who are not muted, and Speed Tablet. Could you please mute yourself? One of them is moving around. One of you is moving around, and it is very, very noisy. Hello. So, 3 aspects of scientific or being able to access scientific knowledge directly are important. For me, it's the time, the correctness, and the empowerments that come from it. Time is a matter in many of our diseases. Scientific publications are the first time this knowledge is shared. So being able to access them directly gives you an advantage in time. The correctness for me is critical, because we have seen this, unfortunately, we have seen this, thank you. We have seen this a couple of times now, that what media report does not truly reflect the content of the original scientific publication, but it is more written up for interest or hype. And that is something that is not helpful for patients. And the last one is that I believe that, well, we often say with knowledge, like, so knowledge is power. But I think for me, an important aspect of power is that power also comes with a responsibility. If we want to empower patients, we also have to give them the responsibility, namely to educate themselves so they can exert that power with like wisdom, and not just because they're allowed to make a decision and then in the end inadvertently hurt themselves. Next slide, please. Something to keep in mind is that electronic tools can be your friend, and spending some time understanding how these tools work will make your life easier or harder. This is kind of the lifeblood of anyone who reads scientific literature. It is what we call PubMed. The website is on there. If you go on there, actually it has quite some interesting sources of information about the history, what the database looks like, and also some help how to search. My simplest suggestion is just to get started. PubMed, put in there your disease of interest, and then see what you get. In the next few things, in the next part, I will, before we go into how you read a scientific paper, I first would like to give you a few pointers. Scientific journals, could you please stay on the slide before? Scientific journals are not created equal. There's a huge range of them. A bit like if you look at like the press, that you newspapers in your country, you will know which were the reputable ones that are a bit harder to read, and then you know what the yellow press is, or you know, like the ones that talk more about fashion or what the stars have been up to lately. To a similar degree, this also exists in scientific literature. So you want to make sure that you spend your time on the most reputable journals and less time on the less reputable ones. Something that you can use in order to judge that is called impact factor. While not uncontested, and there are still people who are not muted, please. There are two people who are not muted, and it's very noisy. There are people, so if you look at scientific journals, what is called the impact factor judges how often publications from this journal are cited and for how long. That is used as a grade to judge whether this journal publishes something of quality or not. It is disputed for a number of reasons, but it is a very good first way to judge scientific information. For us in medical information, what is of relevance is the New England Journal for Medicine and the Lancet. Then in addition, there are condition-specific journals, and it's up to you to find out what they are in your field. But if you start with them, the likelihood that you fall or spend your time on sidelines of your main scientific field is lower. The easiest way is if you have a physician who is very known in your field and you start Googling with their name or the PubMed, put them through PubMed and see what they have published. That's another way to get started. Next slide, please. Scientific publications can be daunting unless you understand that there is something that I consider like the skeleton of a scientific paper. So there is an anatomy to any scientific publication, and that is always the same. So if you now, instead of looking at a scientific paper just as 10 pages of like small print, and start looking at the structure of it, you will recognize that every scientific paper, like an original scientific publication, has an abstract, which is a short introduction, like a little summary of what this publication is going to be about, followed by an introduction. And in the introduction, what people will discuss is the background, why they have done this research, why this question is relevant, and anything else you need to know before, like, to answer or well, to understand the point that this paper tries to make. Materials and methods are the cooking recipes the researchers use to generate their data. The results, and it is highlighted here, are the meat of the paper, and these are representing the findings of the researchers. This is followed by a discussion where the researchers are looking at their results and try to place them into context, and a conclusion which summarizes their findings. Next slide, please. When you do a PhD, and as a PhD student, learning how to read scientific literature is a big part of your training. Usually you get an introduction, and most laboratories have weekly meetings where they discuss the latest findings in their field. Something that I learned and that I found very helpful, and what I recommend actually, is not to read the paper not the way it is printed, but to jump between sections. The way I read the paper is that I start with the abstract. Then I go to the introduction if this is a field that I'm not familiar with and that I'm new to. Then I look at the figures, because the figures summarize the results usually in a quite effective way. Then I read the results. If there's something unclear, I will go to materials and methods. If I'm familiar with the area, I will then read the introduction. Then I read the discussion, and then I read the conclusion. The reason why I'm doing this in this order is actually that researchers are biased, obviously, because they have generated the data. If it is the way you have generated the data, you look at it with certain eyes, and these eyes give you a certain perspective, and they come with your expectations. You thought you would be finding something, or you have an interest to present things in a certain way. So if you start reading the discussion and the conclusion, you will buy into the view the researchers want you to take on the data. However, if you start with the figures and just look at the data first and try to come up with your own interpretation, you have a chance to make up your own mind before being influenced. Once you have your own mind, reading what the researchers themselves thought about it can be either confirming what you think, there can be partial overlaps, or you can just simply disagree. Any of which is part of the scientific process of judging results. It is not just about reading them and taking them for true. It is thinking about them and coming to your own conclusions. When there is this, and actually I should have put a photo of this or a picture of this in there, there is this Arabic tale of the wise men and the elephant, and it was a group of men arguing whether there was such a thing as a whole true, or whether the true could be kind of divided. And the wise men brought in an elephant and put the elephant in a tent and blindfolded the men, and the men were just allowed to touch part of the elephant, and they touched the tail and the ears and the skin, and everyone felt something different and described something different. While what they described was different from each other, all was true because they were all part of the elephant. And I think that's a very good analogy about what the absolute truth looks like. Every piece of research, everything we see is just a part of an entire picture. And it is safe to assume that we do not have the full picture, either because we don't understand the field well enough, or simply because we haven't figured out what is out there. And I think that's a very safe assumption about research, that it is an ongoing process. What we know tomorrow, we didn't know yesterday. So it's a fast moving thing, and where it is wise to consider anything that we know now as true today, but probably less true tomorrow. And having this kind of distance to finding, it helps to judge, or for yourself to make up an opinion and to position how you think about research and how you criticize research. The next slide, please. No. So electronic tools are your friend. I said this already earlier on. Once you started reading papers, the problem is, how do you remember what you read, and how do you keep track of it? In olden days, what I did is I would just print them off and I would mark them, and I would have piles. Well, admittedly, I still have piles at home of papers, and then you would try to classify them and put notes on them, and then try to remember where you placed them, and then pull them back out once you needed them again. However, today there are way smarter options out there, and they offer the advantage that you can actually share your reading material with, for example, your patient organization. If you annotate these files, others can benefit from what you thought about it and your conclusions. So there are lots of different options for that. There are reference management tools. I've just picked a random collection of the ones I'm familiar with. This is just a small part of it. If you go onto the Wikipedia link, you will get a good overview. They come in any type and shape and flavor. They have different features. Some of them are free, some of them are paid versions. Try several ones in parallel and look what type of features they offer. Something that I personally find very attractive is, that's why it says there, features, look for annotations. I personally find annotations very helpful because I don't remember what I read half a year ago. And there are usually like the essentials of a paper. If you highlight them, next time you read the paper, you just have to go through your highlights and you will be able to update yourself on the gist of the paper in a fraction of the time and don't start reading it again. The share function is something that is important if, well, for someone like us, we work in a network and we want to be able to share our knowledge and what we have learned. Not all of these functions, some of them are just personal and you can't share. And so that's something for you to look at. And please move, please mute. That's still 2 people are not muted. And something you want to look for is an integration. So there's an integration with text editors. So because what it allows you to do is that if you write, let's say, a reply or a submission for your patient organization and you want to add references to it, there are tools that allow you to do that automatically. So you can just say add and it will put a little like 1, 2, 3 in there and then we'll make a little reference on the bottom, which I think is fantastic. So this is something to look out for. What you want to know was like, why attend medical congresses? We're now moving to the next topic. And this is now linking to the scientific congress, the scientific publication that we just talked about, to medical congresses. And there are kind of like differences and similarities. If a researcher or a research group nowadays publishes their findings, they often get invited to present their results at scientific congresses. So there is an overlap of what you find in a scientific publication and what is presented in medical congress. Just hold on for a second, please. I want to fix this. We go back to why we go to medical congresses. So the interesting bit that I think and why I think it is so important to attend medical congresses is that you get the data presented from the people who have produced it. Often when you write things up, you lose aspects of this story because you have to condense it and there are always word limits, how much you're allowed to publish in a paper. So it makes a real difference if you hear it from the person who has produced the data, and you often gain an additional angle that you were not aware of. Obviously, a congress these are real people, so you can stand up and you can ask questions, you can interact with the presenters, and you can ask the people directly what they, and exchange thoughts. So I think the connection is really important. Also, when in the future you have another question, a follow-up question, it's way easier to drop someone an email whom you've met in person. If you have said, I listened to your talk at that and that conference, that gives an instant connection, and it really helps you with your work because it gives an easier access to knowledge. So, and conferences, I see conferences also as a two-way street. When you stay up and you have an opinion and you share that with everyone else, people are exposed to a patient perspective. One has to do with care. Just being upset about it doesn't get anyone anywhere. But it does change the tone of a conference, and patients and patient advocates often have additional perspectives that professionals weren't aware of. And once you have established a community around it, it really makes a difference. And we have in our own field have seen that it has improved the communication and the quality of the interactions with our oncologists. And I think this is something to strive for. Next slide, please. Now, if you want to attend medical meetings, preparations is key, and the larger the meeting, the more important it is. In oncology, we have a congress that is called ASCO, which is the annual congress from the American Society for Clinical Oncology. This is a congress that is attended by something like 35,000 people. Then next weekend, now upcoming, there is the Congress of the European Society for Medical Oncology, which is a little bit smaller, but still has 26,000 people coming. So this is a huge meeting. And these meetings are obviously not just running one session. You would never get 26,000 people into one room. How this works is that you have so-called tracks, and they will focus, I'm in the field of oncology, so there will be one track just focusing on breast cancer, there will be one on colon cancer, on lung cancer, and so there will be cancer-specific tracks. Then there will be tracks looking, for example, at policy. developmental therapeutics, so that is the development of new medicines. There will be a patient advocacy track whose chair I am. So these conferences run parallel sessions. And that means it is very important to choose and prepare before you go, because it is very easy to miss something in that variety. There are different types of sessions, and it is important to understand the different flavors that come in to make optimal use of what's on offer. Now, there is the first one is called an educational session. These are usually planned way ahead of time, and they are what it says, educational. The ambition of these sessions is to get the audience up to speed on a certain topic. Very worth attending. The other opposite are the latest scientific updates, and they're often called late-breaking abstracts. This is where you get the edge of your field. So the scientific updates will present data that has just been published, and the late-breaking abstract sessions are often now combined, that the publication is actually released at the time when the data is presented at the conference. So these are really the absolute latest you can get in your field, and something where you should absolutely be attending. Something that we always recommend to our people, and that I personally think is really wonderful from an education perspective, is our so-called meet the expert sessions. They can also be sometimes be called controversy sessions. These are often set up around a tricky case where several experts are asked about their opinion, or it is a topic that is open to controversy. And people will discuss pro and cons on that question. Why I believe that these sessions are so valuable is that it allows you to follow how experts reason about a certain case. What kind of factors do they take into account? How did they come to their conclusion? What do they consider important? What do they consider less important? Who is convincing the others? So these sessions, from like a perspective of growth, are gold, definitely worth attending. Then there are always, or major congresses always have something called keynote lectures. These are carefully chosen topics that are of relevance to the entire conference. They're often quite famous people or known people who have something interesting to say. And I believe these sessions are fantastic for broadening one's horizon, and usually worth attending, even if the topic is not 100% your field. Because they are chosen for these slots, there's usually something of relevance to everyone in there. There are poster sessions and discussions, and this is something one can very easily miss if one is not used to attending conferences. So what happens, the way these conferences are prepared is that people are invited to submit so-called abstracts to the conference committee. These abstracts are then rated for interest and relevance. And the most important one, the most interesting ones, are invited to be speakers. So they will be the ones speaking in the scientific sessions. The ones that are considered important, but not quite as important as the ones presented orally, will be invited to submit a poster. And among those posters, there will be the most relevant ones, yet again, that are presented and discussed in poster discussion sessions. These posters are absolutely worth checking out, because it is often side findings, interesting aspects that didn't quite make it into the main publication, but that are, however, relevant. Also, if there are, let's say, a smaller subgroup of patients that were not quite sufficient to make it into the analysis at the end, but still could be interesting, you will find these things on posters. So it is definitely worth checking out the posters. Something to consider about posters is you want to make sure that your phone, or if you have a smartphone, is equipped with a smart, like a QR scanner, because lots of posters today come with a QR code. So you only have to snap the code and you'll have a PDF of the entire poster, which is way better than taking photos of it. Sometimes presenters will also have handouts, so you can just get a copy of the poster, a small copy of the poster. And it's definitely worth noting the affiliations and email addresses if you have further questions to go back to. Next slide, please. So how do you prepare for attending these conferences? Because as I said, they can be quite large and that can be daunting. Now, the first way and how to find this out is you want to read the abstracts. As I said, people submit abstracts to the conference committee that will then select what's going on. All of them are published in an abstract. Usually now today it's online in PDF. In the olden days, you would get a hard copy sent home. For ESMO, this upcoming Congress, I think we are at 713 pages or something like this. So this can be quite a bit of information. So if you don't want to read all of them, it's quite smart to run a search function over the thing and just pick out the topics of your interest. So what I did is I ran melanoma over it, and that reduced it to 90-something pages, which is already better than 700 pages. You will also want to be following scientific news. Twitter is quite good at it because most conferences now advertise their sessions. So if you go and follow the hashtag of the conference you plan to attend, you get already a good feeling of what the latest will be that will be presented there. And it is always more fun to do this with others. So try to attend conferences as a group, and you can share the workload and already align on what matters. Next one, please. Could I have the next slide, please? I'm not sure. Okay. So you, as I said before, there will be parallel tracks. Trying to just turn these abstracts where you will have marked a number of abstracts to find them in your timetable can be tricky. So many conferences now have an app that comes with a conference that you can usually download just for free. You log into the program so you can mark your abstracts on your app, and it will automatically create a calendar out of it for you. Wonderful. Sometimes you can also share this calendar with your colleagues, so your colleague doesn't have to go do the same work. What we have done for our network now for this coming weekend, so this is very fresh, we have used Team Up Calendar, which is a free online tool where you can have a calendar for your team that you can share with anyone, and you have different rights. You can give people rights to annotate it, and others can just read it so that not someone by accident deletes it all. But if you go with a group, this is a very handy tool that everyone knows what's going on and when to be where. So something that one should not underestimate is that attending conferences, especially the last ones, when you're alone, can be daunting. And you can feel pretty alone in a crowd of people. We have seen in the past that it disencourages patients or patient advocates to do this again. So I think making this something that is worth remembering and just pleasant as an experience as well is worth doing. So try to find like-minded people who want to attend. And don't go alone, organize maybe to travel together and try to meet up. So something like this Team Up calendar that we're using helps already to arrange what to meet. Some conferences, as I said, have these apps. Some of them are actually linked with networking opportunities where you can submit some information about yourself, like your email address if you want, your website, your LinkedIn profile, your Twitter, Twitter handle. So that others can reach out to you and say, oh, this is someone working in this field. I always wanted to meet someone, and can contact you. It's definitely worth doing. And most conferences, especially the last ones, have introductory sessions, preparatory sessions, like how to get the most out of, and networking events where you have like networking lunches or evenings, which are usually the buffet style food where everyone moves around and gets to talk to each other. Make use of them. This is usually where you get to meet lots of people. It's easier to talk over a coffee than per email. And you will be surprised that most others feel just like you, because being alone in a crowd is not pleasant, independent of whether you're a patient advocate or a physician or any other professional. Most of us don't like that. If I could have the next slide, please. So now comes the bit in the middle. You obviously only can attend so many congresses each year because it comes with travel and it takes time, it comes with cost. That's one thing. Reading papers just one after the other is also still depending on you doing the searches and finding the publications. Now, this is something in the middle. How you can keep up over time wwitut having to put in too much effort, so not having to go onto PubMed and do your own searching. There are a number of medical news services that one can use, and some of them are as simple as subscribing to a newsletter, where you can usually select areas of your interest, like for example in Netscape, where you select areas of your interest and they will mail to you, and that depends on your settings, whether you want it daily or whether you want it weekly, and what type of updates you're interested in. You will get updates simply into your inbox. And what I do in the mornings is I do a quick scan of what has arrived in my inbox, relevant pieces I read, and if they then feel interesting, I will post them on our patient forums and explain why these matter. Cancer Network would be a similar one, and I'm sure that we will share the PowerPoint presentation with you afterwards. And you will find the links, the blue ones are the links there, so you can just test them out for you. In addition, what is worth following, and I didn't put any links in there because my interest is obviously oncology, so you would only get the oncology ones. Medical society, like the American Society for Clinical Oncology or the European Society for Medical Oncology, are running newsletter services. It is very worthwhile finding your medical society of interest, seeing out what type of resources they offer, because in addition to their newsletters, they might also have educational material on their websites, they might have videos, they might have material for downloads. So go to them, sign up for that, and that has been quite helpful for us. Most medical journals, and these are the ones I listed early on, you might remember, as I said, journals, scientific journals are not created equal. These are 4 that are definitely recommended. New England Journal for Medicine and Lancet are very high impact medical journals, and Nature and Science are scientific journals. They have fantastic alert services. If you sign up for them, you will get to your inbox what's new in there. Be sure that you select for your interest, because otherwise you will get very easily spammed, and then it becomes irrelevant because no one wants to go through that much information. There's another website, it's called Up to Date, that people recommended, because what I did is I asked on our forum what people are using, and this is a bit of a summary of that. It's unfortunately paying, and we had at some point patient pages, which are then free, but they were not updated. And I actually contacted them and said, listen, what you have on there is not up to date, and with your name, that's rather embarrassing. And we don't want to see that for our patients. And then the answer was like, yeah, but that the part inside, the paying part, was updated, which I thought was ridiculous. So be a bit careful there. Then there's OncLive, which has some nice videos worth checking out. Unfortunately, the partition disappeared in the reformatting. An oncologist I work with a lot recommended Feedly. So get the app and add what you're interested in, and it will sort it out for you. Something that is definitely worth checking out is Google Scholar and even Google Alert. If you're very desperate for information, set up a Google Alert and it will give you anything that comes up with that. When we sometimes do this when there are new drugs coming through and we really don't want to miss anything. The problem is with alerts, it will really, really give you anything. So someone just mentions it in a different context. It does not discriminate. So it's easy to get an avalanche of information that is half relevant, but it's very sensitive. So Google Alerts is good for that. Some people prefer Google Scholar now today to PubMed because it allows the search works slightly differently. Please have a look and pick the one that suits you, but it is definitely, Google has developed some resources that are of great value to us as a community. And with that, we are already very close to our 45 minutes. And with that, I would like to jump to the next slide, namely my conclusions. If we could have the next slide, please. Could we have the next slide, please? Could I have the next slide, please? Could I have the next slide, please, ladies? And this is the last of my slides, actually, before the questions. These are my conclusions. I believe that understanding the latest scientific science is important if we want to be successful in patient advocacy. Scientific progress is the key to medical progress. And I kind of lose science and medical, well, interchangeably, which is not, well, I guess it's fair enough. But we got into advocacy because we want to make a difference for patients. And for that, we need effective treatments and medicines. And for that, we first have to have the evidence what works. And that is the access that we need. Reading original scientific literature, this today was just a quick, very quick overview. It requires training. So doing the first time is not going to be easy, not the second time. People who do a PhD spend years on perfectioning their techniques. So don't think you read 2 papers and you're all done. So being a bit patient and realistic about it, I think is an important stepstone to getting proficient in it. It also is easier if you do it in a group and discuss, because then it's less lonely and you can share the frustrations as well. Getting most out of visiting or attending scientific meetings does require preparation. Just showing up, if there's so many people and so much on offer, is not going to work, and you're likely to miss the most important bits. So it's definitely worth investing the time before attending, and then they can be extremely useful. So last but not least, there are lots of smart tools out to help organize, network, and stay up to date. And the ones I've shared today were just like a random selection of what we are using, but I'm sure there are many more out there. And what is even better is that many of them are free, so it doesn't come, so knowledge does not come at a cost. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention and for your time so late in the evening. And now we have something like 15 minutes for questions from the audience.